You are continuing with the Social Network Show and our fascinating conversation with Carol Todd. This is Jane Karwoski, Dr. J, and Jim Nico is with me today. And Carol Todd, the mother of Amanda Todd, and I know that that is your emphasis even today, that you want to being Amanda's mom is what is motivating you here. You had just been telling us about how essentially, I think this is what I've heard called a cyber mob. The fact that even people who didn't know Amanda would act like a mob acts in real life, just being carried away with the moment, and unfortunately in a very negative sense.
Yes.
Being egged on or whatever. So, but what I'm wondering is what were the effects, when the cyber harassment first started, and how did that affect her mental and emotional health?
When it first started, it brought up all anxieties within her. She was afraid to go out in our community because she was afraid people would recognize her and laugh at her and call her names, which, you know what, now that I reflect back, and this was the case, there are kids out there who weren't very nice, who thought maybe, if they reflect now, they'll understand what they did was wrong. But at the time, it was funny to them. It was a joke. And and a lot of kids will say, well, I said it because I didn't know, I was only joking. It wasn't meant to hurt anybody. But I truly think after, what I've gone through with Amanda and what I've done in having other kids contact me, is that when they see these words, and if it's ongoing, it cuts to their core emotionally and it hurts them. And unlike in the old days, where if someone was harassed, you could go home, you could shut the door, and you could ignore it. But social media has made technology available 24/7 to kids, and they are addicted to it. They can't not sleep without their cell phones on, without text messages buzzing at 2 a.m. And so they're hooked up to it. They're connected to it all the time, so they can see what's being posted about them. And this is detrimental to their mental health. They eat it, they sleep it, they absorb it, and there's been an increase in young girls we hear about, but it also happens with young boys.
Yeah.
Their brains aren't fully developed, and some of them, not all, have struggles with trying to cope with the put downs and the harassment and the name calling and having no friends. So then they socially isolate themselves because of their anxieties and paranoia. They go on the internet more. They don't always make those face-to-face connections, which you need face-to-face to learn how to interact with people, how to think, how to respond. And then being socially isolated causes some depressions to form. And sometimes kids can work their way out of it with supports, and sometimes they can't. And when you look at the health situation across the world, mental health, it's there, but it's not one that is up there in funding. There's cancer research, there's diabetes research, there's heart and stroke research, and money being put in to fund those projects. But when it comes to mental health, it's still stigmatized, and so not enough people rise to the occasion to say they have a mental health. They don't want other people to know. So the numbers probably aren't justified. And so they're not getting all the supports that they need to help them. Or there's wait lists. So if you take a child into the ER and they have a broken arm, they get looked at and fixed right away. You take them into mental health problems, or they've self-harmed themselves, or they need more help, and they sit and they wait. And quite more often than not, the recommendation is, you need to go back to the doctor. Here's a referral to see a psychologist. But unfortunately, there's a 6-month wait list. So when you talk about mental health and you talk about self-harm and you talk about all those things, 6 months could be
It's
too late.
ridiculous. Yeah, that's a ridiculous
And so
time.
I can't say Amanda had care
Mm-hmm.
through mental health and for all her disabilities. So she had a lot of supports, but there's lots of families out there who
Even
aren't
that is
having
not.
it.
Yeah.
It's a big system to wend your way through, and when your family's already in upheaval due to what's going on, and then you're trying to field your way through a
Bureaucracy.
yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. So I feel for all those parents. So when we talk about the Amanda Todd legacy, the two main things right now that I'm really concerned and want to focus on is the cyber harassment and the mental health concerns that it can cause.
Mm-hmm. You know, when you're discussing that, you related the situation of having no friends or being made fun of and everything. How could that not make you feel bad and horrible and not want to subject yourself to that by going out the door or going online? Or
And so I have to explain also in Amanda's final YouTube picture,
the one
final
with the
one with the cards, right? And she said, "I need someone, I feel alone." And people jumped to the conclusion that no one at home, her family wasn't responsive to her. But that wasn't the case. It was, I think it was teenage stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Was there anybody that came to her defense? Was there anybody that got in there and said, stop being such jerks, and
No.
No one.
No. After the fact.
Yeah.
After the fact, after she died, yes. But not during.
So young people and children are, boy, I don't know. Does this mean that there's this fellow feeling of compassion that just is absent in their hearts and minds? Or is it that they're also afraid? I can understand fear being, it's always hard to stand up against bullies, but gosh.
This is the hardest part, but in human nature, since the beginning of time, from philosophers, metaphysicians, scientists now, sociologists, psychologists, everyone has been, it's one of the big questions in philosophy of all time is human cruelty.
Yeah, and you know what? When we talk about people who bully, and I don't like labeling bullies as bullies. Individuals exhibit bullying behaviors.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So, and so the behaviors are learned because when we're all born, we're born on a even slate, and we acquire personalities and we acquire activities and we acquire how we're going to interact with people. So there's a thought that people who have bullying behaviors have learned it from somewhere, and they're not totally happy people themselves, and they do this to promote their own, to compensate for something that they're missing, or to make themselves feel stronger, or feel that they're doing something. Unfortunately, what they're doing is negative behavior that's hurting someone else, but they don't get it. It's just like back in the psychology days where we learned about the man of the house that comes home after having a bad day at work, and then he yells at his wife, and the wife yells at the kids, and the kids go after the dog, and the dog goes after the cat who eats the fish, right? And so it's a pecking order that keeps coming down. And so if we only taught people how to be kinder and more respectful, maybe some of these behaviors would decrease. I don't know if we'll ever solve the issues of bullying and eradicating it, but we can certainly work towards decreasing it, and that's where the kindness and the respect would come into play, and that's at a very young age.
One thing that is different, you mentioned earlier the old days. And the old days when I was in school, we talked earlier before the show,
Yep.
There were times, there's always been bullying and et cetera. But the thing that has radically changed now, Raffi talked about it, Sandy Garasino talked about it, exploitation news is talking about it. It's the amplification of this. My gut tells me that if we can slow down through our association, our work together as a team, the amplification of the crime. It is what you said earlier is so important, and I think it's the key. It's the turning point. One thing is to have a bad experience at school or anywhere online, but it's the continual battering, the never escaping it. In other words, that's what's different. Okay, very quickly. In the past, when I was bullied as a kid in grade school, it didn't go on long. It happened on the playground. Kids laughed at me. The nuns didn't notice it. Mm-hmm. I got through it. But it didn't go home with me. It wasn't on a phone. It wasn't on a computer. It wasn't next to my bed where I was being texted about it. There were no pictures on a television screen or a computer screen. That is the amplification. The amplification we're trying to stop.
And Carol, what would you say to people who would say, well, just turn off the phone. Don't go online. How does that go over with kids?
It doesn't work because technology is so rampant that it's like an addiction to kids. I think young people, their brains are rewired for using technology, and that's where it's that instant gratification. And this is what technology has given, is that instant gratification of answers back and forth. I know that teenagers now, girls with they all want iPhones because you can do a group chat, and they all decide what to wear in the morning via group chat, right? And so trying to take this away from them doesn't work, and it puts them more into a depressive mode. If I had taken Amanda's technology in the last, say, 6 months of her life, if I had taken it all away from her, it would have thrown her into a spiral even more. The thing we have to do is, if technology is a problem, as adults, we need to monitor their safety. We can't take it away. We wouldn't take away our stuff. Like, think of yourself as a professional and someone took away your phone. Mm-hmm. If we don't want it done, then you think about the kids. However, some people do say you should just get your kid off social media, but that media is still swirling. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter if your child's on it. It's still running rampant. And the best thing also that we can tell our youth out there is, if someone's making comments about you, report it to a trusted adult, a safe adult. And if you need to get enforcement, report it to your school, to enforcement, and hope that something will be done, and have your parents monitor it also. Okay,
well, let's talk next about the impact of the ubiquity of this social media in the lives of young people today. And we'll be discussing that with Carol Todd, mother of Amanda Todd, and the Amanda Todd Legacy representative and founder. So we'll be talking with you about that next.